wanted to ask about radical social work in practice today. You've mentioned the history, and often it's seen as very theoretical or something that academics sort of talk about. What does it actually look like in practice? What does it mean for real frontline social work?
Yeah, I think that's an important question because I think you're right. I think possibly the enemies of radical social work like to just argue that it's something that academics talk about, but it's, you know, they do the talking, but practice is quite different. And in the real world, radical social work doesn't fit. Let me answer that in a number of ways. The first one is that the journal Critical and Radical Social Work, since it started 2.5 years ago, we ensured that there was a section in that, well, there's two sections. There's one called Commentaries and there's one called Voices from the Front Line. And in both of those sections, we encourage service users and frontline practitioners to contribute. So in the commentary section, we've had frontline workers commenting on the implications of policy or changes to their practice in various different ways. And in the frontline section, it can be about social movement engagement, it can be about service user movements, but we've also had radical social workers from the front line talking about their practice. And interestingly, in the last 2 editions, we've had 2 award-winning social workers. One, a guy called Tony Staunton. He's a frontline practitioner in Britain. He works in sexual exploitation of children, that's his area, and he's just won a national award for his practice as a radical social worker. So this is something that you can take into practice. Of course, as a radical social worker, that means for him that, you know, starting off with notions of power and inequality, impoverishment for those children, it's about sexual relationships, it's about power relationships, and it's about how social workers work with the victims of those relationships and you know, to overcome trauma and deal with, you know, with the various aspects that they face. The other is a social worker from Scotland, a man called Keir McKechnie, and he's just won an award for his work with people with drug and alcohol dependency. Again, he's a radical social worker, he's involved in his union, he's involved in all sorts of campaigns. But that background means that he has developed a way of working with drug and alcohol dependency that is much more challenging, but is also an award-winning project. So that's 2 examples, but there are lots of ways that radical social workers work. You'll see radical social workers working in asylum work, you will see them working in domestic violence work, you will see them working in a whole host of projects, but they also work in statutory social work services, and you can be radical in a statutory social work service. There are now a number of books. There are Ian Ferguson's Radical Social Work in Practice. There is a man called Colin Turbett who continues to be a frontline worker who has written about radical social work in the front line. Steve Rogotsky is a frontline practitioner on our children and families team who has written about his experiences of working. And at all times that means speaking truth to power, about the impact of cuts, about supporting families, about the needs of families, about you know, how to look after yourself as a social worker. So very importantly, being a member of collective organisation, being a member of the union so that you can't be picked off, that you share problems, that the problems of service users are the problems of you as a social worker. It's about drawing links with social work organisations. It's not about having professional distance, but overcoming professional distance whenever we can. So in the real world, I think radical social workers can do a whole host of things. In mental health, in adults and children, as well as in drug work, in asylum work, in domestic violence. It's not the case that you can't be a radical in practice, and it's not the case that there are not lots of very, very good radicals out there doing some fantastic work. Of course, when we go into the international perspective, then the picture becomes even broader because we continue to find social workers involved in campaigning social work, community work, social workers where part and parcel of their job is conscientisation and getting communities that they're working with to think about their position within structures of oppression and inequality. So, you know, across the world, there are radical social workers on the front line doing fantastic work. And what we want in Critical Radical Social Work as the journal is to make the space, the voices from the front line, a space where radicals across the world who are doing frontline work can share their experiences, and let's learn from each other. Let's not be defensive, let's go on the assault, let's share the good practice, let's share the good radical practice that's out there.
Thank you for those really tangible examples of how to actually work in practice and be thinking about how to challenge what you see and create that consciousness among your fellow colleagues as well as people that you work with.